Welcome to Hoodwinked with Dr. Mara Einstein, where we pull back the curtain on marketing scams, culty brands, and the tricksters trying to separate you from your money and your mental health. Can you define religion? Think about it for a minute. If you had to explain what religion is, what would you say? Is it rituals? Is it texts? Is it belief in a higher power? Does it have to be about community? And key to our topic of marketing and cults, is there a difference between what is sacred and what is secular? Can a basket be sacred? Can a bracelet? If you consider yourself spiritual versus religious, how do you define and practice that spirituality? Is it constructed based on products you bought at your local hippy-dippy store? Or is it based on something that was sent to you through your social media feed that you had no control over? Our guest today, raising the hood off the hoodwink, is Dr. Kathryn Lofton. Dr. Lofton is the Lex Hixon Professor of Religious Studies and American Studies, History, and Divinity at Yale University. She is the author of 2 books, The Gospel of Oprah and Consuming Religion. She is the person that I go to when I have questions about religion. And so I wanted her to set the foundation for us in terms of understanding what is religion, what are cults, what does that have to do with consumer culture, and how do those things intersect? So let me welcome Katie Lofton.
What fun to be here, Dr. Einstein.
Let's start brass tacks. You're in like an intro religion class with undergraduates. What is religion?
The phrase I use these days to be as short as possible is system of worship. When you look at dictionary definitions of the word religion in the last 400 years of English language dictionaries, you see the word system and worship appear the most. Those are the words that come up. There's other words that come up too. The phrase belief in God is also a phrase, but it's more recent in that last 400 years. And as a lot of scholars of religion have written and thought about, emphasizing belief in God really focuses on a monotheism. It focuses on belief versus practice. So I like system of worship. At the very least, it makes you think about what system as a set of things that try to look like a whole. But anyone who's in a system of anything knows how messy they are. They are never comprehensive. They might act like they have everything organized, but the system is a mess and always allows itself to be victorious. If you have a problem with billing and you're calling those 1-800 numbers, you're stumbling into a system. And I like the word worship because it reappears as a kind of idea that there's something higher that system is pushing you to look at, something above something, and that there's a ritualized return. So worship as a form of veneration, of thinking something is higher. And of course, that can be God. But you and I are people who are interested in thinking about how a variety of not terribly systematic systems organize consumer attention towards certain kinds of things over others. So system of worship is what I lean into.
Well, it's so funny that you say that. So I'm a media ecologist. And what an ecology is a study of systems, right? So what happens when you put a media into a system and how does that change the systems? So is religion ecology of worship? Is that another way to think of it?
First of all, I love that. I just think that that is A, true. B, I think a lot of people who might be listening would want to add some slamming words to that. They'd want to say, but ecology is a beautiful, balanced thing, and religions distort and demean, or they're things that only make you feel good. They'd want to add subjectivity into a thing you and I are using words of science for. And I always want to honor that. Another way of looking at religion is it's something people always have a super strong reaction to. They never seem neutral in relationship to it.
Right.
And I like ecology because it does command us to think about the living fact of it. And system of worship is a little harsh, socialist, cold. It's just this neutral brutality. Whereas ecology of worship kind of lifts us up a little bit.
Right.
We can see there might be some marshlands, there might be some woodland creatures, there might be some meteorology, it's a little bit more tender to it. So I really appreciate that upgrade.
Well, it's so funny, too, because you study religion with marketing and I study marketing with religion. So it's like this sort of balancing. And everybody has had some interaction with marketing, and everybody, or most people, have some kind of interaction with religion. So they have their own thoughts and ideas about what that is and about how that's supposed to look and be practiced. So I love this, definition or phrase that you're using to talk about it, because it opens it up. And so it makes me wonder about, there's so many people now, either who are religious nuns or religious duns, like ex-Mormons and ex-evangelicals and so on, that are like spiritual and not religious. So how does that sort of trying to find spirituality fit within this definition of religion, or does it not?
By raising the specter of marketing, you raise an image that you think so thoughtfully about, which is the human desire to uncover a lie they're being sold. So there's something I'm being offered. Who's behind this? In sales, Dr. Einstein to say there's something, there is something you're being sold systematically that's pretty disturbing. And spirituality has in history a kind of a tender flair to it. It's marked with something that doesn't have to be systematic, that I just get to pluck and pick and choose. But as our colleagues, Courtney Bender and John Modern have pointed out, there is actually a lot of systematicity of the spirituality we're being marketed. It's not just every kind of religious experimentation that shows up on these American shores. Certain kinds get access through immigration routes. Certain kinds circuit better on lyceum tours or theater tours. This is a 19th century invocation of who's getting to hear what influencer, in other words. And anyone with an algorithm knows they're not getting the full sale of every polytheism on the planet. They're getting sent a million different descriptions of Aquarius. So what I'm interested in, you're interested in, is how it's not as random and free, even though that word spirituality seems like one and has throughout history been used to say, I'm not religion. I'm not ordering you around.
Right.
You get to pick and choose, and you get to feel like it's your spirit driving it rather than doctrine describing it. A lot of spirituality is something you only get because it's sold for, a certain price at your local New Age store. Where those New Age stores come from? Why in every New Age store do they have the exact same baskets for stones? I'm buying them. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying a mass cultural element is a part of every time you encounter something that feels like spiritually true to me.
Given how broad the definition you've given is, you could worship anything. I mean, you could worship the market. You could worship capitalism. You could worship, I'm not going to say it.
I mean, part of the intention by becoming, that's a definition I came to, I've written a lot of different things where I invent definitions of religion. As you know, that's a topic that in religious studies comes up a lot. And I've been very interested in the problem of its definition. But I wrote for this essay, this new volume that Sarah Hammerschlag edited in the Critical Terms for Religious Studies, the second edition, doing the entry on religion. And so I did this super intense research of its historical use in English language. Because I'm very interested in AI and how AI is surveying the volume of words used. They just do, Google Ngram, where it tells you the number of sites or hits. If anyone's not used that before, it tells you across history how often. So I want to see just vernacular, everyday human use rather than the fancy ways. You can, as you know, you can find definitions of religion in religious studies that are 7 sentences long, and are filled with words that normal humans don't speak. And I learn a lot from those definitions because they're trying to get at cognitive science angles, anthropological angles.
Right.
But by emphasizing this, I'm trying to say, you know what? In human history, we know people have always had something the word religion is useful to describe. The earliest archaeological evidence of humans is burial mounds that indicate to us a veneration of some things over the others. So I am trying to find a definition that is trans-historical and that will encompass a wide variety of human attempts to survive in society.
Right.
And in so doing, I think there are a lot of different things you can hold higher than yourself and repeatedly return and be systematized to come back to. So I think a lot of left-leaning Americans in the last 30 years would not be down as congregational attendees, but they have been passionate about education. So one of the reasons I've gotten into this definition is I arrived at this university, Yale, and had never seen any religious ardor greater than a Yale alumni. So that is the sense of that the school itself produced a primary identity that forms their social relationships, what they think should happen for their children, what they believe a highest power is, what rituals they think should be repeated. So it's not the only identity, but it is often one of the ones they're the proudest of identifying with. So a beginning thing would be to ask yourself, what's the social category you are that you're willing to admit in public and ally with? That's a word I think religious studies is going to want to track because you're going to hold that a little more sacred. I've also done a lot of work on trans politics and trans rights. And I think trans life right now, interesting that the sociological evidence about trans persons in the United States suggests they are largely less than the average American interested in denominational religions and more interested in spiritual but not religious beliefs or atheism. But I think there's a lot of interesting evidence, and there's some scholarship coming out of this in sociology of religion that suggests that the very fact of practicing trans politics becomes a pretty pervasive and powerful feature of their everyday life.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in how different kinds of identity, not just political identity, gender identity, racial identity, can become features of self-formation that we ritually reaffirm through hierarchical ideas of worship.
What hits me is this idea of wanting to be something bigger than yourself, right? Wanting to look to something that's bigger than yourself. And hearing you talk about it, it makes me think of a couple of things. One, that we somehow want to think about doing something bigger and better, but also the issue of community, because that also is something that always comes up, both in terms of religion, but also in terms of cults. And I'm going to ask you to define cults in just a minute. But what's the importance of community within the context of religion, or, these groups who are an ecology looking to worship something?
A lot of Americans who are talking about the contemporary political moment talk about a longing of community, a fracture of community.
Mm-hmm.
That what I think they often don't see is that they're often participating in a community. That is, I want to nominate the possibility that if someone is posting regularly on a certain Reddit thread, or they are themselves consistently following a particular person playing video games and showing up for that Twitch performer. I'm arguing community is re-territorialized in present day, of something you've thought a lot more about, which is how does social media and digital life reorganize how we understand ourselves. And that the image that one has that community is when I go, Stars Hollow for a town hall meeting. That's community.
Mm-hmm.
But that has a rather fantasist idea of what town halls in Connecticut are like, FYI. But also what it means to gather together to substantiate community. Community is as much, and this is Benedict Anderson, is a state of mind. What is the community you and I think of each other as a part? I think one that binds us together is a very particular nerd community that you and I enjoy participating in. Both, women identified persons with Jewish interests and urban sensibilities. These are all senses of how we organize ourselves communally that I think it's worth identifying that most human beings are participating in a lot of communities. They may not like them. They may not own them as their identity.
Right.
But they are nonetheless participating. You're a citizen of these United States. I'm sorry to tell you, you're a part of the American community.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to flag that community is a word that people associate with nummy loveliness, but it's sometimes you're involuntarily rendered inside. And scholarship is interested in the things we do, whether or not we love them.
Well, I think that's also that the social media spaces have so convoluted what we think of as community. And to the point that you're making, that's fine. But, something like Facebook, where Mark Zuckerberg said that was going to be a community. You can't have a community of 3 billion people, especially when people within the context of that community don't have to put their face on the page, right? And that they can hide behind something and they don't have to treat people like other people. Something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is this whole idea of meeting people face to face. And I'll probably talk about this more over the context of the podcast, but it's such a safe space for an individual to hide behind within the context of those communities. And I like the idea of people being sort of pushed into a bunch of different communities. And then those different communities become the way that they create their identity. And that's where, things like brand communities come in. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Now, what is your definition of a cult, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, when I was coming up as a scholar, I learned as an undergraduate from Jonathan Smith that phrase that a cult is someone's religion you don't like. So the cult is just a mean word for something else you're seeing a group of people do you don't like. So I my first encounter was to be wary of that word. Jonathan Smith was known for many things, but one was for writing a very powerful essay that tried to explain what the mass suicide at Jonestown meant to its participant. Why was that suicide their understanding of the final solution? That was their language, a final solution. And so he's trying to take this thing that had been rendered violently a cult in all public media, and it's a perfect instance of a cult. There's a character who's running the group. There's a lot of children running around that we feel are vulnerable to them. And then there's an image of bodies. And indeed, to drink the Kool-Aid is, one of the locutions we most associate with cultic behavior. Meaning you've drank something against your will, without full rationality, without full consciousness.
Right.
So I came in kind of ambivalent to the study of religion. I came in not just ambivalent, but probably hostile to the way that a lot of secular society marked cult things that were criticisms of secular society. And Smith taught me, and many other scholars have contributed to what was going on at Jonestown with many disturbing things. But one of the primary things was a criticism of the failure of the civil rights movement to deal with de facto segregation, just how racist American society was. Anyway, there's a lot to be said critically about what was going down in that community, but one of its positive intents was to create an integrated white-Black community and saying secular society has not really dealt with how racist it is.
Right.
A lot of things we call cults are things that provide solutions to other people's problems. And so today, as a teacher and scholar who thinks with other people who are writing new work, both Dana Logan, who has an amazing piece out in Religion and American Culture about Sion, and Cody Musselman, who's written a lot about CrossFit and Soul Cycle. And both of them have taken on how the word cult in a lot of practitioners' lives is not only seen as a bad word, it's seen as a word that actually, yeah, I'm in a cult. It's fine. It's actually saved my life. CrossFitters and soul cyclers don't find that offensive when you say, hey, you're in a cult. Like, yeah. It's the thing that solved a very powerful problem in my life. And for that, I'll just nerd out and go back that the word cult really originates in a ritual-focused group activity. So the cultists of ancient Greece was a place where you did a ritual activity, the people in charge of managing ritual activities for a larger community. Note that people today, when they talk about being fine, that they're in a cult, it's because that ritual activity has changed something they want changed. The word cult continues to be one I think is important to pull out to talk about troubling group activity. So let's always hold out the use of that. But I'm also interested that some people are in group activity other people find as troubling and they think is their salvation. And that's where I'm appreciative, again, who focuses on questions of addiction. Cody, who looks at the question of how physical fitness is so required for capitalist survival. Here's the place that will finally break through your self-denial and get you going.
That's so fascinating because the next book that I'm working on, working title is The Cult of Thin, about how we've so bought into this idea of, obese people are automatically unwell. And that's just not true. And it's just been so ingrained. We have just been pounded on again and again and again that being other than these very, very skinny people, that there's something wrong with us. And it's fascinating that you talk about Cody's work because it isn't what you weigh. It is how in shape you are. So it's like you can be heavier, but if you're walking around and you're able to walk around, you're able to work out, you're able to do all of these kinds of things, that's fine. That's actually healthier than somebody who's really thin and sits on the couch all the time. But we have such a mixed idea of what those things are.
Lynn Gerber's book, Seeking the Straight and Narrow, really taught me a lot. And in that book, she compares ministries related to trying to de-gay in Christian culture and to thinify. And so she links up the kind of sexual correction with the question of correcting weight. And something I just hadn't thought about before I read that was just how entailed in Christian society is the evaluation of how hard you're working to get better. And if you're not working hard to get better, you are not really in the good light of God. And the sense that individuation of human turmoil and individual evaluation of sin has just been so pervasively condemning so that when people see people who they do not identify as thin, it's also an accusation about their capacity to work, their willingness to understand their physical responsibilities in society. So it's the sense that Christianity is pervading our thinifying culture that I don't think we can give enough words on. I can't wait to read it. Keep going.
Well, thank you. But it's interesting what you say in terms of this is the definition that you're giving of religion by making it so tight, but open in a way. You're giving people permission not to beat themselves up over a belief system.
It is certainly my intention because I think there's a lot in religious studies in the last 10 years that I've been a part of this that we're focusing so much on how you are being systematized. That is, I've been a part of a movement, secularism studies, that has really been looking at how pervasively what we think is good and bad has been drawn by agents that have Christian interests and then erase the Christian parts, but they're still there beneath the eraser marks,
Right.
And I'm proud to be a part of that critical movement. But where meanwhile, certainly in the classroom, going back to the introductory classroom, I'm facing a room of 120 undergraduates right now. And they just want to believe in some stuff, man. And they want to figure out how to organize their lives enough so that they can fulfill those beliefs without also forgetting to have fun and not like failing at everything they do. There's just a hunger, as has been true across time, to occupy something without eating themselves alive for its occupation. So it's just be mindful of what you're worshiping would be my general message. And know that you're going to worship whether or not you want to, because we are in systems of authority we do not fully control. So trying to be mindful when you do have the choice of where you put your attention seems pretty powerful to me. And for me, that includes asking my students, right now we're waiting for Taylor Swift's next album release. If you are a Swiftie, which there's a strong demographic at Yale College, it's an important time where they're ritually going through old albums. And I'm all for, I get it. I totally support the Swiftie culture. I just suggest there are other, even if we just stayed in the realm of cis female whiteness, there are other artists that might be interesting to attend to that could give a different image of society, whiteness, femininity. So I'm just interested in know that your attention being given there is not being given elsewhere. And what does that do? I just want to invite that question.
The idea that time is our only inventory and, where are you choosing to put it, right? Amen. So if you'll excuse me, I have to do this because you went right to the cult being a bad word thing, but I have to ask you about new religious movements, because this was something that people pushed back on me when I was writing Hoodwinked, saying, oh, but you can't call it a cult. You can't call it a cult. And the book is really for, and this podcast too, is really for a broad audience. It's not just for academics, and it is for people to try to understand the systems that are working on them, be they cult-like systems or marketing systems or capitalist systems that are working on them. Can you talk a little bit about new religious movements and why religious studies scholars got sort of wrapped up in that whole idea and not wanting to use the word cult?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always feel frustrated when I hear a person who's done a really cool book comment that something like reader number 2 was annoying. So I just want to say to listeners, that is a universal pain of our profession. And I just extend grand sympathy. What is that gatekeeping about? The best version of it is, we've studied this a lot, and we found out this way of seeing things does not always help, and in fact can harm real human people. And the best version of that, I won't say the worst version, is it's just territorial ownership. It's about trying to defend an existing field, self-explanations, without really interrogating them. So a lot of brave work, because people just don't want that in the field. They've decided that's not what will promote their view. So they're trying to protect their thesis continually being supported. And in the 90s, there were a lot of incidents where federal government relied on articulations of cult to intervene negatively on religious behavior, and religious studies scholars felt part of their heroic effort. And this was a part also about resuscitating countercultural movements that happened, including Jonestown and Jim Jones's People's Temple, was saying sometimes what happens is that word can gain such power, it can give people righteousness to intervene in communities that have religious freedom to operate the way they want to operate. Because where's our real bound on when we choose to intervene on a social community doing weird things?
Right.
As you and I know from COINTELPRO and other FBI investigations, very peaceful movements like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were being investigated as a cult. So the point is that word can be used to stigmatize people just trying to live an alternative way of existing. And by using that word, we give license for media, politics to pile on and say, let's sail in there and take the kids away from the families. So religious studies enters dorkily, underpaid, not terribly respected, and says, hey guys, sweet peas, those are human beings, and they have rights to love Jesus just the way they want to until they commit actual crimes. What are the crimes you're charging? Let's hear the crimes first before we get into stigmatizing them for just being weird and different. And that's one of the reasons I got into it as both a social movement and an intellectual proposition, is it is a place that will tell you why Mormon polygamy makes sense to the theology of early Mormonism, why circumcision makes sense to the history of Judaism. It is the place you go to learn why things that some people would think are unthinkable are completely comprehensible within certain social systems. And in the United States, you do not have to be a Protestant Christian to thrive. But we do know from its history that is what is usually being used to cookie cutter out a lot of strange, weird, free expressions, some of which do abuse children, some of which do need federal intervention.
Right.
But the word can so often be associated with a violence that religious studies wants to prevent as much as possible.
Let me pivot at this point. Talk to me about the whole idea of commodified religion. What is that?
So something I have been interested in my whole life is how it's very hard to live outside of capitalism. And we toss that word around a lot. It's associated with a kind of woke left proposition. But I grew up in a world and then went to the University of Chicago that just assumed that the economic order of things is described usefully by the idea of surplus value being a pricing mechanism that does tend to make things being priced beyond the actual labor it takes to make them. And that one way of talking about such a system is this word capitalism. And it's pretty hard to live outside that pricing system. And that pricing system tends to treat human beings as ends to making profit more than necessarily their own human freedom. But you can have flourishing, certainly through practices of entrepreneurship and survival. And the United States is an incredible experiment in that hope. The reason I gave a lot of thought to this, I was raised by people who had a very strong criticism of market culture and felt it degraded humanity and wanted to, like a lot of religious movements, although my parents were not a part of a religious movement, they were part of a political movement, but that distinction itself, you could say, is somewhat specious. But a lot of religious movements are asking, how is the normal way human beings make money maybe not like great for them as people, as spirits, as souls?
Right.
So commodified religion is just a way of talking about something that's actually relatively neutral, which is a lot of things that are currently demarcated as religious are also things that make a lot of money. And my first book was about Oprah Winfrey because she was a person who, by any measure, was a ritual presence in Americans' lives. She was a talk show television host in the heyday of that format. For 20 years, Oprah Winfrey was on every single day at 4, and many people tuned in. And I wanted to think about that as a church-like community because, as anyone who's listening to this knows, the word Oprah now is almost synonymous with religion for a lot of people, that she is a figure who provides spirit leadership. But she was also making a lot of money. And when I was first in American religious history as a field, people were nervous about focusing on a corporation, a person who'd become a corporation, because they said, well, in the United States, religions are nonprofit entities. But anyone who studies the history of the Roman Catholic Church or conservative Judaism knows that religions are not only simply nonprofit, they wield profit. They wield resources accrued from donations and participation and advocacy and veneration. So I wanted to help think with religious studies a little more critically about the central role that something being bought is not automatically not spiritually or religiously important. And I have many objects in my life that I paid very little money for and I paid a lot for it that are very spiritually powerful to me. And if I lost them, I would be heartbroken. So what is the relationship we have to goods and things? Commodified religion tries to help us think about that there are things that money is circulated for that also have powerful religious consequence. And I use Oprah and Taylor Swift as two metonymic, largely for a lot of Americans, relatively positive examples, but they are indisputably billionaires.
Right.
So what are we talking about when we talk about celebrity? I think we're talking about celebrity as one of the primary forms of commodified religion.
Yeah. Well, I also think about it, when I was thinking about your work and having you come on here, I couldn't help but think about MAGA and Trump. And, it seems to me it's all about buying the stuff. It was about going to his rallies. It was about buying the big Trump signs that you put on the back of your truck. They had pants with Q on them and the T-shirts and the whole thing. It just seems to me that it's about what he has to say, but it was so much more about buying the stuff.
Your language of brand has entered my vocabulary more, the way you use the category of brand and make us think about how I get to be both branded by, associated with. Mm-hmm. So what am I buying when I buy a Colts T-shirt? What am I buying when I get a MAGA hat? I am not just buying an object that has money that we can evaluate simply by how much did it cost to produce. No, you're also buying a relationship to the social world. You are interacting with the social world. You are representing a relationship.
Yes.
I can say in my own life how many times talking about objects of culture with other people has made me feel closer to them, made me find connection. So to think about, Trump is a person who, from the beginning of his career, was very delighted by being everybody's idea of a guy who thought everything could be bought. Anything has a price. He was willing to bully around and pay for it. He participates in one of the more primary forms of American religion, which is property sale and purchase. Right. Say he's a primary speculator and he's a boom bust guy. And he's like, do not be afraid of money's power in your life, and you have the right to spend it. And don't let any woke character make you feel bad for what you enjoy. Get those brass furnishings. Put your name on the top of long before he was a political actor. He was licensing people's decadence in relationship to money and buying things. And I think a lot of the early cultural acceptance of him, including in the hip hop community, was he gives total braggadocious mafioso license to being a person who doesn't care how offensive his expenditure is to you. That's the right you have when you have resource.
I studied with Neil Postman many, many, many years ago, and he wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. So when I started my doctoral program, and you're sort of in the midst of it, and you're learning all of these things about how media studies works and how it's all sort of moving us in ways that we feel like we have no control over. And, add on to that the capitalism and all of that. And so I asked Neil, how do we step out of this? How do we separate ourselves from being pushed in this way? He said one word: religion. But that was 20, 30 years ago, right? 25 years ago. Is there something else?
I'm still standing by Neil's position in the following sense of what I think he's incanting, which is when we say the words commodity and religion in popular culture, I think there is still associations with religion that it is something like removal or otherwise, or something that is not this world. Your and my scholarship tries to show how this world is organized in ways to return attentions to certain things that they may not look like, your idea of Dorothy Day or Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. They look like I just can't stop buying that stuff that Instagram sells me. And that I return to them. The algorithm keeps passing for me certain kinds of things that show my social interests. Mm-hmm. That is a system of worship. God knows I am certainly repeatedly returning to spend my money on a thing that I did not naturally arrive at. The social life I have participated in putting me there. But I'm still interested in trying to capture and preserve religions as a form of social dissent, of trying to find ways. And I do think when someone's a Swiftie, they are negating other kinds of fabulousness and pop and rock culture. They're choosing one thing over another. I think we are constantly trying to carve out a way of feeling less lousy. And the more ardent people tend to get about religion, they're usually saying, I don't like the way this world organizes me. And I want to try to find an otherwise, Sean Crawley's phrase, otherwise possibility. And I hold to that, even though in general, I do think that in public culture, and I think especially in the rise of the alliance between the MAGA movement and, the technocratic billionaires of Silicon Valley, an increasing cynicism about religion and public life. That's why I've been certainly watching, as many have with great interest, what forms of Christian nationalism might be co-opted. But as we know, the people who are running Facebook and Instagram and social media, Elon Musk, these are people who are proudly antagonistic to the claim that they're religious. If they cite anything, they tend to cite the Stoics. They tend to cite people who focus on habits of control, not theologies of submission or vulnerability or humility. So I am interested in when we see Christian nationalism emerge, which I think is a very strong thread, but for me as a kind of a minority movement in contemporary right-wing politics. I think contemporary right-wing politics are really owned more by a people who want to be, everyone wants to be master of the universe. Mm-hmm. Make America great again is making me great in this lifetime. I get to win, I get to rule, I get to have sex with whoever I want, I get to touch whoever I want. No one gets to tell me what words to use. And that's a ferocious secularism is a drive of a lot of far-right politics in America. And alongside that, Charlie Kirk funeral, where we see lavish displays of something you and I know has a long American evangelical past. Right. And so I'm interested to watch how religion plays out in the combat of American life, but a lot of it looks very antagonistic to claiming religion as anything other than an ethnic identity. And I include in that Christian nationalism as a form of white Christian identity, even though it does welcome people outside that racial profile. It is a way of being a part of a historical American white power.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up AI, and I wasn't going to go here, but since you did, I'm going to. What are your thoughts about that whole spiritual psychosis as it relates to AI? Because you understand that a whole lot better than I do.
I'm just so honestly delighted sometimes when, however bad the world gets, I just want to flag a lot of scholarship has predicted or described this reality. We live in a reality now that a lot of our nerd people have been talking about for some time. Also, science fiction has been talking about for some time. So there are a variety of prophets in the land, but students of religion and technology, including my great colleague here, John Durham Peters, have been talking for some time. There is no physical idea of technology that does not very quickly upon its inception become essential spiritual tool. So the divide we have between my iPhone is is absurd. My relationship to this device is more powerful than to most human beings. It is on my body all the time. I don't let someone be on my body all the time. I am touching it constantly. I don't touch anyone constantly. I don't need to give a bigger speech. We all know. I don't even need to describe ... Your relationship to your phone is something that we can't use simple vocabulary. So that now what we have is a increasing sense that you don't ever have to be alone. You can be talking to therapist, God, girlfriend. I can right away go on ChatGPT and have any of the three and indeed ask them to be all at once. If I've learned anything from the history of scholarship about religion and technology is it does us no good to be simply worried. What we should be looking at is what kinds of new solutions to human problems are they coming up with? It's not surprising that in an era of loneliness crisis, where people's greatest relationships are often with groups, they play video games and they are oceans away from each other, that something that talks back directly and interacts with me in my isolation becomes a central spiritual, so unsurprising and worth just being gentle with, because obviously the problem that brought people to that is not gentle.
Right.
And so figuring about how to see that with compassion is certainly one thing religious studies has taught me.
Last question. And you've given us so many wonderful nuggets and wonderful things to think about and other people's work to dig into, and we will put those in the show notes for people. But to close this out, what's one tool you'd like listeners to walk away with today so they can figure out a way to navigate this world we're living in?
I can't say enough how I wish everyone would do in their life a system audit. What are the systems I am subject to? That starts with a list of bills, comrades. It starts with what are the systems I must interact with? I consume a lot of far right prepper information. I'm because of the culture I grew up in the far right and the far left meet in the prepper culture. And I was definitely nearby and a part of a lot of that world. And you think about people with basements filled with canned food, but also there's a lot of products being sold on social media for and here I'm now going to voice a conspiracy theory when some foreign country destroys the power grid that's very weak in these United States. What kind of devices? That's where people run when they have conspiracy theories. Before we get to those conspiracy theories, let's just focus on how are you systematized? Then start thinking where I voluntarily choose to insert myself, participate in, speak back to, give my data to, and ask yourself, does this list in any way reflect something I think is powerful, cool, and worth fighting to keep achieving? Even if every human person tried to put themselves nearby some form of systematic action or dissent that reflected their values. And here I'm really open. I would be delighted if we saw a surge of even conservative religious participation. My concern is that we've become so unconscious of the systems we're upholding, we do not know how to structure new ones. And the cool thing about systems is they're human invented. They are human managed. Most of us have had jobs that are all about managing and contributing to system maintenance. And I ask people to think where in their life, rather than as so much of self-help culture, focuses you on personal habits, personal rituals, personal responsibilities. Honeys, good luck to you. I suck at them. I collapse constantly. If that's your addiction to keep thinking about how I can personally be better through small actions at 5 a.m, bless you. But the thing I think we can really do with greater effect is think about who I could maybe be nearer by in a collective action that's trying to think differently how we systematize value than we do. And that can be as small as being a part of a mutual aid group in your community. I'm just saying, take something small that already exists in social form that you could join so that your list of systems is not only what the man is telling you must participate in. Because when they press the off button in those conspiracy theories, all that disappears, chaos ensues, and you'll start wishing you'd been a prepper. One way to prepare is knowing some human beings who collectively organize.
I can't possibly top that. Thank you so much, Katie.
I'm so grateful for your learning. Thank you for this time. I really appreciate it.
From conversations over the years with religion scholars, I had come to believe that religion had to include rituals and community and scripture. But what I learned from our conversation is that religion is simpler than that. It is a system of worship. It can have all the accoutrement, like a religious space and a leader, but it doesn't have to. What do you think? Is that definition too broad? Let me know your thoughts. Go to my website, drmaraeinstein.com, and drop me an email. Subscribe to Hoodwinked with Dr. Mara Einstein on your favorite podcast app for new episodes every other Tuesday. You can follow me at Dr. Mara Einstein on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Threads. You can pick up a copy of my book, Hoodwinked, How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults, and please do, wherever you buy your books. Hoodwinked is produced by Multitude. Our lead producer and editor is Bren Frederick. Thanks to Kayla Einstein for our cover art and Mark Langer for our theme music.